Welcome to For Better or For Court, Family Law in New Jersey.
Welcome back to For Better or For Court, Family Law in New Jersey with Miss Alix Claps. Alix is a partner at Heyman & Fletcher and a certified matrimonial law attorney who helps New Jersey families handle divorce, custody, and complex family matters with clarity and care. I'm Evan Mack, and today we're talking about prenuptial and postnuptial agreements. Alix will clear up what they really mean, when they really make sense, and why they actually can strengthen a relationship rather than undermine it. Miss Alix, welcome back, my dear.
Good morning, Evan. How are you?
I'm well. What is a prenuptial agreement, and how is it different from the postnuptial one?
So a prenuptial agreement is where a couple sort of lays out their intentions for how their marriage and the potential dissolution of their marriage will work. There are limits to what you can do within that, and we'll get into those. A postnuptial agreement is different, not just in terms of timing. A postnuptial agreement happens during a marriage, but there has to be a good reason. Otherwise, in New Jersey, at least, they are presumptively invalid.
Why do you think prenups still carry so much of a stigma, like even when they're becoming more common?
I think when there is a discrepancy sort of in the financial status or social status of the parties, that's where the prenup can look like there's some kind of suggestion that one party's not going into the marriage with the best of intentions. I don't think that's true. I think in those cases, you're often seeing concerns not from the parties themselves, but from families of the parties, and I can understand that. But I also see a lot of prenups where people are getting married later. People getting married in their 40s, their 50s. They have careers, they have their own businesses, they have their own property. And while they may have a general understanding of how that would play into a marriage and its potential dissolution, everyone might feel better to have it laid out properly. You also see it a lot when you've got people going into second marriages, and they might have had a divorce. They might have kids from a first relationship, and they want to make sure that those things are protected going into a second marriage.
What kind of couples benefit from having one of these in place?
I think the most beneficial are the mid-career professionals. If you have a professional degree and you have a career and you're building that sort of work, and you want to make sure that that doesn't get intertwined with your partner's business and how that operates. It's important. The most important thing in a prenup is transparency. Everybody has to lay all of their cards on the table, or it's not worth the paper it's written on. That's the fastest way to get a prenup thrown out, is to not have adequate disclosure. So this is for couples that have things. I'll see people come in who are 22, they don't have anything. Well, what are you doing a prenup for? There's nothing to protect. We're talking about people who have assets, who have careers sort of already midway through.
Are there situations you'd strongly recommend that postnuptial agreement after the marriage?
I would only recommend it when there's been some sort of change of circumstance, because otherwise, if the postnuptial agreement is entered into and nothing sort of changed except you're staying married, there's a concern from the courts in New Jersey that it's inherently coercive, that it's some kind of power dynamic problem. If you've had a change in circumstance where you've separated for a while, you contemplated divorce, and in order for your marriage to function better, you guys want to kind of define your parameters going forward and your intentions. Great. That's a good reason to do a postnuptial agreement. You got two spouses who have had, let's say they're both teachers, and one wants to quit their teaching job, cash out their pension, and start a business making balloon animals. The other spouse may not be financially on board with that decision, but they don't necessarily want to get divorced. But that's a big decision that this one person is making, and they want to make, if they want to make this gamble, the other spouse understandably wants to protect themselves. So that's a big change in circumstance, and it's a change that's not been being made jointly by the joint decisions of the parties, which is what marriage is supposed to be, and what, in the case of divorce, a court is going to look at as a joint decision of the marriage.
What are some of the most common myths or maybe the fears you hear when someone brings up the idea of a prenup?
That they're going to somehow give up all these rights and not understand it, or that if they don't have it, that somehow everything that they came into the marriage with is automatically going to get, like if they get married for 2 years, this house that they've owned for 15 years before the marriage is suddenly they're going to lose it. No, I mean, not having the prenup means here's what the laws of New Jersey, how they apply to your situation. If you have the prenup, there are still things you can't negotiate away. Like you cannot address custody, parenting time, child support, anything related to children you cannot address in a prenup. That's because it's against public policy. So it's not going to do everything for you. But you want to make sure you're talking to an attorney about whether it's right in your circumstance and what it means. If you want to go into a prenup, but you don't want to show your to-be spouse what your assets are, that's a huge red flag for me. You can't do that because then you're going to have a piece of paper that's not worth anything. It's not going to protect you because you haven't done the work required.
So, Ms. Alix, if you know a lot of these agreements, can you share a case where having one actually made the divorce process smoother or avoided that conflict altogether?
When they're done well, prenups are fantastic for divorces. I hate to say that, but they are, because then you already know what everybody had at the time of the marriage. So you know what you're looking at in terms of what is the marital growth of these assets. How did the parties agree? Did they address alimony? Did they address how things would be distributed? Did they address real estate? Did they address those things already? I've dealt with them where, I get handed the document. It's got all of the schedules. It's got all of the information. And then maybe there are things that they didn't own that they did acquire during the marriage. So we have to deal with the marital property and things like that. Or there's a change of circumstance or somebody, they sold something and they didn't deal with that small issue. But it reduces the number of things we have to disagree about.
How much flexibility do couples really have in deciding what goes into the prenup? Are there limits under New Jersey law?
There are definitely limits to what you can do in a prenup under New Jersey law. You want to be careful because if it is inherently coercive, it's not going to be enforceable. If it goes against public policy, that usually is you're not allowed to address custody, parenting time, child support. Anything to do with children does not belong in a prenup because children are a whole different category. If it's signed too close to the date of the marriage, that's a question of duress. You want to be avoiding that. But other than that, you have a lot of flexibility. You can agree to deviate from what the statutory alimony factors would be. You can agree to deviate from how premarital assets might become commingled. That's kind of the biggest category of things that are addressed in a prenuptial agreement is, I own this business. I own this house. I own this motorcycle. I own this thing that I've owned before the marriage. And maybe we're both going to go live in this house, but we're agreeing that it's not going to be commingled because for X, Y, and Z reasons. I mean, there are a million reasons why you might decide that. But it's not going to be something that if we divorce, I'm going to have to risk giving up. I'm going to have to risk selling. I'm going to have to risk you owning. We're going to not do that. We're in agreement now, so we're going to write down what we agree to now so they don't have to fight about it later.
What happens if one spouse later claims they signed under pressure or without that full disclosure, Alix?
Then it becomes an issue that might need to be addressed by a court. If you have a divorce proceeding and there's an argument about whether or not there's a valid prenup, you're going to have a hearing. It's a threshold issue. There's going to be some discovery. You may have, you're not required to have an attorney to do a prenup. I think it's one of the few documents where it's a really terrible idea not to have one because you're going to screw it up. You're going to do something that's going to make it unenforceable. You're going to not include some information you should have, or you're going to try and do something that you're not allowed to do. An attorney is going to help make sure that you've got everything you need in order to make the prenup enforceable. So that attorney is going to get called in to testify at the hearing about, here's the information we exchanged, here's the conversations we had, here's the timing, here's how many times the agreement went back and forth between counsel before we signed. No one was in tears in the office signing it. These are all things that the court needs to look at. And this is a threshold issue because you can't go into a divorce trial without knowing whether or not there's an enforceable prenup.
For couples blending families, doing the whole Brady Bunch thing or entering a second marriage, what considerations come into play when drafting an agreement?
I think it's important for both spouses to know what the pre-existing obligations are. So if one spouse has an alimony obligation to an ex and is coming into a second marriage, that's going to affect that spouse's income and the ability of that spouse to contribute to the household. Similarly, if you have a spouse who was receiving alimony who's about to get remarried and there's going to be a prenup, I want that prenup to acknowledge that by getting married, by living together, by cohabitating, they're giving up alimony that they are otherwise entitled to. That's an important consideration. you might want to attach the marital settlement agreements of those parties to the prenup as a full disclosure, because also if one party had a pension or a retirement asset that is divisible but maybe can't be divided until such time as they retire, that's usually in the case of pensions, the pension amount's going to look a lot bigger than it really is, and everybody needs to know that, so that when they retire and this person's only getting 70% of what the estimated monthly payout is, nobody's surprised.
How does the tone of one of these conversations change when you frame the agreement as planning for peace of mind rather than planning for divorce?
I always, when someone comes in and says, I want to get a prenup, have you had any conversations with your fiance about this? Sometimes they come in and they haven't even proposed yet. And it's a matter of talking to, okay, why do you want it? What do you think you have that you need to protect? What are your concerns? And then we figure out how to approach it in a way that is, and everyone's going to lay all their cards on the table. And if at the end of everybody laying all their cards on the table, you guys don't reach an agreement, then guess what? You don't have to get married.
Right.
And that's why the prenup is different than the postnup too, because the prenup is part of the bargaining that happens. A marriage is a contract, all for acceptance consideration. This is part of that. Postnup is different. Postnup has different dynamics, different considerations. But for a prenup, it's about having a conversation and understanding, I'm going to ask for these documents from your fiance or from your fiance's attorney because I need to make sure we know what they have, how that impacts things, what questions I will then have for you. It's just information gathering. And all of this, you guys are going to exchange it, but it's not going to be public. It's going to be something that's important for the two of you to know, for us to have documented, but we're not posting it on the internet.
And Alex, for couples who are curious but nervous, what is that first small step they can take to start the conversation in that healthy, constructive way?
I think a lot of it is making it part of the broader context of what sort of partnership they want in a marriage. What are their career goals? What are their family goals? Are they looking to live in Manhattan and rent for the rest of their lives? Are they looking to buy a farm in Hunterdon County and have horses? What are their goals? Because ultimately, all of this is about making sure they're on the same page with everything. It's not just about money. The prenup is just about money, but the marriage is about the money and the goals and the support and the teamwork.
Amazing stuff. Thank you, Miss Alix.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for listening to For Better or For Court Family Law in New Jersey. If you're interested in learning more about prenuptial or postnuptial agreement, visit HeymanFletcherLaw.com to connect with Miss Alix. And don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review if you found this episode helpful. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.